I want to push back and challenge you a little bit on why we should be monitoring these sites. So, one of the first objections I could think of is, a lot of these communities are pretty small, they're pretty obscure. They might only have a few thousand users or tens of thousands of users. And, just in terms of the amount of activity that are going on, I know from the presentation I saw of some of the sites that you were mentioning, they might only have like 100,000 users, which is
Yeah.
small potatoes compared to, a Facebook or a Reddit or something like that. Uh, so with given the small user base some of these communities might have, what would be the reason to pay attention to them at all versus the more mainstream platforms?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Just because it's a small user base doesn't mean that there's not content of interest there. Any content posted into the online domain, into the digital domain, potentially is of use. Again, it could be malicious threats that are being posted in there. Just because it's a malicious threat in a alternative network doesn't make it any less malicious than if it's in a mainstream stream network. These alternative networks also tend to create a bit of an echo chamber, which is a really interesting dynamic that these alternative social networks drive, and so it almost creates a much safer space for people to, I suppose, share in many instances what some of these actors, how they really want to portray themselves. So if there is a threat to be made, they may feel like that sort of that domain, that alternative tech location is a safer place to share those sort of indications and thoughts and feelings with like-minded individuals. And again, that means that potentially before it manifests itself into either a mainstream network or into a real threat, that sphere and that area of interest, those alternate tech social, can be used as a very early warning or indicator that there is something awry in that digital space that might be coming over the horizon, if you will, towards these organizations.
Okay.
So those are a couple of good reasons. Another one is it's interesting how some of the narratives and sort of some of the misinformation campaigns tend to migrate their ways from the smaller depths of the alternate social networks into some of the mainstream social. And I know sort of, not too long ago, you put out a blog around misinformation and the Wayfair, QAnon theories, etc. Those QAnon conspiracies and the mantra behind them, especially when targeting the likes of Wayfair, they started in Chan boards. Like, Chan boards are the origin of the QAnon theories in many instances, and then they've sort of started to migrate their way across into mainstream media, into platforms like Facebook, etc., etc. And again, sort of being able to detect those early warnings really at their genesis, if you can, that enables you to get ahead of it, plan, mitigate if you can, and maybe if you can't stop the wave coming, you can at least put up enough of a mitigation and plan for what might be coming, so you can mitigate that impact.
Well, that's a really interesting point that you just made about the misinformation. So, with like the Wayfair example, if you're just coming up and detecting this stuff once it's on Facebook or Reddit or whatever, you've kind of missed the boat,
It's too
or
late.
you're you're messing a couple of hours or maybe a few days to respond. Where if you were watching this, like you said, at the genesis on these alt tech channels, you can have a lot more time to prepare for the proper response.
Absolutely. Yeah. Time is crucial with so many things in the security world. And brand protection is a big piece of, the I'm going to say the corporate security scope these days. It's becoming more and more a piece of the corporate security scope. That sort of overlap between marketing and corporate security working as partners, because frankly, a threat to an organization's brand can have far-reaching implications financially, from a physical security perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So the two sort of need to work hand in glove, very much like the physical security team, the cybersecurity team these days. A lot of moving parts that involve, that need some interlinked workflows, et cetera.
Right. And I'm just bringing it back to physical threats. I know we had an unfortunate shooting recently in Texas, and some
Yeah.
of our colleagues were talking about how a lot of this stuff was being posted on, I think it was a site like a Russian alt tech site,
Yeah. OK.ru.
OK.ru. Yeah.
Yep.
And like same kind of thing. Like if you're watching the mainstream sites, great, you'll get lots of intel there. But in this particular example, a guy like him who was this not neo-Nazi white supremacist guy from the early media reports, uh, that's all getting kicked off the mainstream sites pretty quick. So a
Yeah.
lot of these bad actors are boom, these more obscure communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, there is a long history, especially in the likes of Chamboards, where, especially white supremacists have posted manifestos before undertaking violent events. Even you go back to Gab Gab sort of. You look at Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Manifestos were posted into Gab prior to that event. So you need to be looking at the right places to pick up those early warnings. Unfortunately, history repeats itself, another tragic example of why this is an important space to be monitoring.